Well, welcome everybody. My name is Warren. I'm here to kind of talk about introduction to data governance. So one of the things I want to make sure that is as I kind of alluded to earlier, is want to make sure that you get something out of this as an individual, or at least get a better understanding of what data governance is, what role it plays in the organization, and what are some methods and means of being able to implement. As customary across all the sessions, please silence your cell phones, right? We don't have one of those wonderful animated cartoons like at the movie theaters, right? Where you see a movie scene, you get interrupted. But if someone rings, I will go ahead and throw candy at you. So we'll make sure that we play this game. But yeah, please silence your phones. We'll make that work. As you can tell, I got a sense of humor. It's great. If it gets a little crazy, just Warren, tone it down. We'll make it work. Pass has a lot of different things than just Pass Summit. Most of you probably already leveraged it, but you got things like 24 hours of Pass, local groups. I'm a local chapter leader, so if anybody in the Indiana area, I run the Indy BI chapter as well as the Indy Power BI chapter. So if you got any questions or anything, bring that up. Sql Saturdays is something that obviously, hopefully most of us are aware of. That's how we got wind of Pass Summit, but if not, it is free 8 hours of education. It rotates weekends, usually Saturdays, with the exception of Israel, will be on Thursday. But just about every other organization, every other location around the world tends to have some of these events. I highly recommend that you leverage that in your local area. Most of the speakers that you've seen here today that don't say the word Microsoft are more than likely doing the circuit, which means a lot of the people you see here are actually on these Sql Saturday events. Marathon of Pass virtual groups and volunteers, right? We're always looking for volunteers. We're always looking for people to help out and enjoy. So please explore, figure it out, see how you want to get involved, and we'll kind of make it happen. A little bit about me. I'm a principal solutions architect, principal consultant, technology lead. Picture poison when it comes to titles, right? To me, titles don't mean much, but ultimately I've got 20 years of data experience. Started in the world of document imaging in the 90s and built my way through all the way till now, right? So I've done all kinds of work from development to DBA to solutions to integrations, coding, the full stack. And what I've discovered is I love all that stuff, but at the end of the day, I love solutions. I want to hear of a problem. You tell me that someone said you can't do, and let's find a way around it. And I notice it usually involves one of two things. It involves technology, and many times involves people. So that's kind of where my passion is, and that's where this presentation comes from and originates from, is I want to talk about this concept of leveraging technology with this idea of people and this concept, this umbrella of governance, and how it kind of goes. So part of our agenda essentially is, I want to talk about, do you need data governance? Right? Do you understand what it is? Do you understand what points do you feel you need it? I want to talk about what it is. I want to go into some of the governance objectives, the roles of the data governance, some data classifications, which is a huge component of this, and usually the biggest hurdle in most organizations. We'll talk about some additional elements that data governance includes, and then some keys to success. Data governance is one of those things where everyone aspires to have or even think they have, and then they realize that what we have is not really complete, or it's a subset, or we have a different definition of what that looks like. So what I want to share essentially is, what are the criteria that you may find yourself in that should be driving you towards that goal of this is what data governance is and how it should be. So with that said, do you need data governance? One of the questions is, are there compliance requirements, right? Do you have restrictions where you got to keep data secure? Do you have things like HIPAA and GDPR and CCPA and all these different compliance areas that, depending where in the world and what kind of business you're doing, you're going to be held responsible if that data makes itself out in the wild or if it's exposed in a way that's not there, okay? If you have that, that's a good indicator that data governance is probably something you should have or you need to evaluate. Are there security responsibilities, right? There may not be any fines or any regulations that said this, but you know what? I need to secure this data. Why? Because it affects the livelihood of everybody in the plant or everybody that is purchasing our product, or market competitive nature, right? Making sure you're competitive in the market. Are users leveraging data in ways unbeknownst to the business? Okay. This is one where I hear a lot of people, oh, I know exactly what my users are doing. Okay, so you know what every single Excel, every single Microsoft Access database out there in your organization is doing. And they're like, okay, yes, that's ultimately what we're talking about when it comes to data usage. You know, all organizations have people playing with Excel files. That is the most used BI tool in the world, and it will continue to be so. All these wonderful BI tools that are trying to make things easier, that is great, but most of them Excel can connect to. Most of them, stuff can be exported to CSV, and I can play in the tool that I know, which is Excel, right? So that's never going to go away. So you'll always have this problem where you've got that. User taxonomy, all right? So you got users using terms within an organizational unit within this business, and discovering that, you know what I call a customer and what you call a customer and what they call a customer are different. So how do we control that to make sure that when we're having conversations that we understand what the definitions are of what we're talking about? That, believe it or not, is part of governance as well, right? What is going to be the enterprise definition of a customer? And now I don't care what marketing, what sales, and what R&D calls that, right? They can use their own taxonomy, but we have a standard definition for it, and we can provide this cross-reference piece as, oh, a marketing customer is actually a user, or an R&D customer is actually an organization that purchased this product, not someone I'm talking to, right? Are there challenges in data management, growth, and manageability, right? Do you have a lot of data? Are you generating more data? Is data becoming more and more, right? Every organization is starting to recognize the fact that data is a tangible asset. It is something you can monetize. Is it something that, depending on the market you're in, you'd be like, hey, guess what? I am going to share my data, potentially through data virtualization if you want, and be like, guess what? You're going to pay me for it. A lot of organizations are realizing that their data is valuable. So now, because there's value to it, how do you protect it? What are the rules of engagement? How do we identify it? How do we know what is valuable and what's not? All I know is I'm getting data. But as far as I know, network logs, that's probably not that valuable. Unless you're selling the data to a network engineering company that wants to use that for some kind of heuristic model that they want to do to build a better product. Right? So it goes back to what are the creativities of that? So who here has data governance? Okay. What is data governance? One of you that raise your hands, give me your interpretation of what you think it is. Please. Repeat. Care and control of your data. Okay. Another. Anybody else in the room? Anybody else care to venture a
we have something we do called governance, and we want data governance, but what they ended up doing is prioritize. Like this is what's important right now. That's kind of what our governance is.
Okay. Anybody else? Data stewardship. Okay. Anybody else has enough? Yes. A system to make decisions off of? To help people. So basically a system or a process to help people make decisions off of. Okay? Anybody else care to add to those to the list of definitions? So in all, it's that and more, right? Every one of you has given a perspective, an angle, a view into what data governance is. But at the end of the day, it is managing the projects that are acquiring data, manipulating data, using data, and how those projects interact with that. It is data stewardship and managing the data sets that are considered to be mastered and how they proliferate through the organization. It is about the care and the use of data and how it's secured and who has access to it. How is it monitored? How do we control what's in it and what's not? It is everything that you said and more, okay? Metadata management, standards and frameworks, naming conventions, access controls, what tools you can and can't use. All of those things fall under the umbrella of data management and data governance, okay? So it's defined by the Data Governance Institute, a system of decision rights and accountabilities for information-related processes executed according to agreed-upon models which describe who can take actions, with what information, and when, under what circumstances, using what methods. Blah, 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 blah. A lot of, say that 10 times, right? And not get it wrong. Burp it for each mistake. Or we can go in short. It's a way to ensure that we have quality, availability, integrity, security, auditability, and usability of data within an organization. And yeah, that one's just as much of a handful, but it's more concise, all right? And this right here is the basis for what I call the framework, okay? Every decision that you make within the organization that dealing with data, you need to ask yourself these questions. You need to figure out, what is going to be the quality of this? How are we going to maintain quality? How is this quality going to be assurance, right? When you are building a new project and data is either consumed, it's going to be generated, created, made available, what's the quality look like? How is that going to work? The integrity, all right? We got all this data. Yeah, it looks nice. It's all spelled correctly. Can I trust it? Is it coming from a trusted source? Has it been validated? Has someone says this is the right thing we should be making our business decisions on? And if not, why not? Is it available? Got this wonderful data. It's in a data lake. No one has access to it. It's not available. You can't see it, can't touch it. It's in a form no one can see, no one has access to. Or you can only get it through an SSRS report, through an extract, all right? So when it's all said and done, you need to figure out how is this going to be available? The security of it. How are you going to maintain it? Does it need to be encrypted? Encrypted at rest, encrypted in transit, encrypted upon display. Who has access to what elements of this? Those are all things that need to be considered with every decision regarding data. Usability. Not only is it available, but how can I use it? Am I allowed to use Excel? Am I allowed to use Power BI? Am I allowed to use it by sharing it with my organization? Oh, and by the way, if you want the slide deck, let me know. Just email me or send me an invite or whatever, and I will send you all the information. I have no problem sharing it. So hopefully that'll help with a little bit of the trying to draw stuff out and so forth. I will share this with you. So how is it going to be used and how easy is it going to be made? And then the big one, auditability, right? Am I keeping track of who just accessed this data? Who just downloaded this? Who just ran this report? Who just made this extract? Who just connected to this? Right? Certain data sets have certain security requirements, especially if you're in the DoD side of things, dealing with federal governments and military, right? You're dealing with ITAR. You're dealing with, PCI. You're dealing with NERC and the gambling, the casino industry and so on. There's all of these regulations that say you need to keep track of X. How are you going to do that with this data set? In every project, everything that you're about to do, you should ask these questions. Okay? It's not one tool does this or that. This has nothing to do with tools. It has everything to do with every implementation that's going to be using, delivering, or generating data. How are you going to apply this to that? Okay? Any questions about this? So let's talk about some roles. There's this concept of a data trustee, okay? And the data trustee essentially is what has been known as the data governance council members, right? They're the folks that come up with the policies that say, we need to come up with something that does this. We made a decision that this is how we're going to do things. This is how this is going to happen. This is the level of control. This is the level of X, Y, Z. These are the people that are coming together, providing the guidance so that everybody else in this role stack can start implementing and managing and leveraging this information. But someone has to make this decision. In a lot of organizations, hey, we got a governance council. Who does it include? IT. Wrong answer. IT has no business telling marketing what data is sensitive and what data is not. Marketing should say this data should be available to X, Y, Z. Now, it is IT's responsibility to say, because this data includes IP addresses, formal names, phone numbers, addresses, whatever classification you have must meet this security requirement or this compliance to make sure you don't get audited and dinged for it. But you should have representatives of the majority of your business stakeholders in this console. Now, not all of them may have skin in the game. We're talking about how do we handle Visio documents in the R&D side for a manufacturing product. Sales and marketing care less about that. But if we're talking about how we're going to do enterprise reporting and whose definition of a customer we're going to use to define this, to give to our CFO, CIO, CEOs to make financial decisions, guess what? Everyone will probably want to have stake in that. And of course, guess what the answer is going to be? Use my definition because I think it's most important. Or use mine because it's more important. And you got 3 or 4 people saying you got to use mine. And the idea is you come up with a collaboration, you come up with an answer. And then that answer gets passed down to data stewards and data custodians. So data stewards tend to manage these processes that the data trustees say need to happen. We need to have this framework. We need to code in this way. We need to use this naming convention. We need to store data this way. We need to, whatever that happens to be. The data stewards manage those pieces where it's applicable. The data custodians build it. The data custodians is IT. They're the ones building the master data management systems. They're the ones implementing the security models in the data lake. They're the ones managing access control and everything else. They're the ones building the tools to audit what's been happening. But the decision of what needs to be audited comes from the trustees. The constant revisiting of that, how is our auditing process working? Are we compliant? Is our data complete? Is our data secure? How's that working? That's your stewards. IT should not be going in there wondering whether we got the right data in the right place. IT's job is to build it and let you guys use it. Here's the holes that are required based on the trustee requirements. Now it's up to you, the stewards, to make sure that stuff is in the right place. And if not, do we need to review the process? Do we need to build a new process? Do we need to augment the process? Do we need to whip some people in the shape because they're not following the process? Let's call it what it is, right? We're human. First thing we're going to do, we're all gung-ho. This is great. It's exciting. Then we get down to the implementation. Oh, my God, this is a lot of work. I am not built to do all of this. It sucks. I hate this. I came here to do data science stuff, not figure out what the data structure is in a data lake and try and locate which folder it should be in. That is not my responsibility. I don't want that. So those where you find those advocates. And then the last role that a lot of organizations forget are the actual users, the people that are consuming this, right? You made these policies. You come up with these things you say you need. You then build it from an IT structure perspective. You manage it with your trustees, and no one's using it. Okay? This goes back to figuring out why. Have you guys heard the term shadow IT? Who's heard that? All right, can someone give me a definition of what shadow IT is? Who raised their hands? Because apparently you know. IT done by business. Another definition. Okay, another perspective on that. Okay, another definition of that. In those 3 definitions, what's the theme? A business unit going out of their way to perform an IT activity. Now, the reasons why that happened vary. And I've got a slide in here that kind of talks about that, so I really don't want to steal the thunder on that. But this concept of shadow IT is where a lot of organizations find themselves. And shadow IT is a detractor from governance because it's basically you're skirting the system.
Yeah, the problem with shadow IT is not IT, it's the fact that it's shadow. It's completely outside of any controls and process and normal.
Exactly. It's not monitored, it's not secured, there's no process around it. It's just people doing what they have to do to get things done because for one reason or another, IT may not make themselves available, may not be fast enough, they might have said no, and we're like, we're gonna say yes, right? And we're gonna do it anyways, right? And so forth. So when it comes to shadow IT, you've got this thing where you're constantly dealing with this data, and this data's coming in. And one of the aspects and one of the scary parts of shadow IT is we don't know what data sets are being made out there. And if we don't know what's out there, we can't classify them to understand whether this is a piece of data that's sensitive or not. Because at the end of the day, data governance is supposed to do three things. One, absolve people of decision making when it comes to what's the word I'm looking for? Compliance and security and how to do things. The how part, for the majority of that stuff, a lot of the individuals that are in this decision-making position, that decision should be very simple. We look at the data governance program, we identify what's applicable, we see how we apply to it, and anything that's outside of that, we should ask a question and say, hey, we got an exception. But the idea is that it's not a decision that needs to be made as to whether this data should or should not be secured. Who has access to it? What tool do we use? Where is it stored? All of those things should be a part of that already. Okay? So data classification levels. As data is generated, you need to figure out, is this data that's publicly available? Should people be allowed to use it? Anybody be allowed to see it and use it? Should it be controlled? Should it be restricted? Every organization should have a minimum of 3. You may find yourself with a heck of a lot more. But the idea is this, right? If you find yourself in a situation where you've got a source system, it comes in, you've been told, guess what? You're going to go to a particular CRM system out there, and you're going to pull this data in. It's like, all right, fine, I pull it in. Who's going to use it? How's this going to work? First, you need to figure out, is there any risk to this data getting out in the wild or not? If this data were to go on YouTube or on Facebook or, I'll date myself, old school Napster, right? Because it's still out there. It's still in use, believe it or not. In some kind of file sharing website, are you going to lose your job? Are you going to be fined? Is your organization going to get shut down? Is there any financial risk, monetary risk? Is there any risk in that? The risk is yes. Then you figure out what kind of risk it is. Right? Controlled data sets could be something like competition of competitor advantage, right? If it gets out in the wild, the world's not going to end. I might lose my job, right? Imagine if the secret sauce of how Synapse works were to go out to AWS. Right? The world's not going to end. Someone's going to be really unhappy, right? You're going to lose competitive advantage. You're going to lose market share. You're going to lose all kinds of stuff potentially. And what's the risk of that? Compliance is a risk. And that would fall under restricted, right? Because there's a monetary fine potentially involved with that. Employee-sensitive data, that kind of falls under controlled, right? Why? You don't want everyone knowing what everybody else is making. Can you imagine how many pissed off people you have? All your senior DBAs making 4 different salaries? Because you got 4 of them, right? That would be a wonderful thing. Sony, right? Remember the Sony hack back in the day with the whole movie thing? One person made 10 grand, the other one made 10 million, and they're co-stars. It's a beautiful thing, right? Can you imagine how pissed off they were? That kind of thing can mess up morale. That is a risk. That is something you need to control. Client perception. Believe it or not, this is probably, that and competitive advantage are probably the 2 biggest ones to an organization. Target. And they got hacked. How many people went to go shop at Target? For the next 6 to 8 months, the best place to go shop. Lines were nil. You know your stuff is secure, and everything is at discounted price. It's great, right? But how many of us actually did that? Why? Because of client perception. Oh my God, I don't want to do that. All these data breaches. Anytime that there's a disclosure of information that's uncontrolled, right, there's a risk to that. And that has issues. But this is what you would do, right? For every data set that you have, every source system that you have, you got to go in there and I got to classify all this stuff. I got to figure it out. What's the risk? Do I have 3 levels, 8 levels, 7 levels, 13 levels of data classification? And that's something as you as an organization need to understand and figure out. And by the way, this is not a one and done kind of thing. It's not like, hey, we spent 8 months and we just got data governance implemented and we're done. It's like BI, right? How many people think you do BI and you're done once you stand up the data warehouse? Exactly. You just started a process that will take a life of its own if it's used. And that's the same thing here. Your data governance program is something that will eventually evolve. And it's something that if it's used, you will be told where it needs to change. But if it's not used, honky-dory, right? No news is good news. Yeah, tell that to a DBA. Right? Tell that to sysadmins that are dealing with Knox that, hey, we got no response from the server, must be up. That does not work that way. Your data governance program should be held in the same level of accountability. We need to have feedback. People need to be telling us, hey, you know what? This is cool, or this sucks. This is retarding my project. It's running slow. It's an inhibitor. And then you have those conversations and you approach the council with, hey, you know what? Here's how it's inhibiting our project. I understand the compliance. Could we possibly do this? And that's that evolution. So, other things that kind of fall under this whole data governance piece. Database design conventions. How many of us have gone into databases, whether it be BI databases, customer databases, or databases that are built in-house, and we're like, all right, who the hell named this table? You got TBL in front of the table name. I know it's a table. Maybe VW knows a view versus a table, but it's already a table. I already know that, right? Or let's do underscores, or let's write the full name. Oh, guess what? Let's keep everything to 30 characters long on a 1,000-table database. We're not in that kind of system if you're dealing with SQL, right? Let's come up with better conventions that work within the confines of the tool that we're using, but establish them. Yes, sir?
Yes, quick question. I worked at a bank for a long time, and all the table names were cryptic numbers. The question is, who defines that convention? Because you have one department saying something, the other department wanting something else. So how do you get to that unified convention?
So the Unified Convention is controlled by the Data Governance Council. At this point, you've got representatives from both sides. I'm better than you. I want my stuff. That's just the way it works. What happens in events where you got two people that are against each other? They go to court, right? There's the judge, there's a mediator, there's a moderator, there's someone mediating that to kind of come up with it. At the end of the day, you're going to have to dictate someone who's going to make that decision. And whether they're part of the council or CEO of the organization, everyone makes their case. But at the end of the day, a decision has to be made. Someone's going to take responsibility for that decision, and it needs to be proliferated and backed up. It's a process that's built, and someone's going to have to make that call. And that is where you start going down those paths of, all right, we got these naming conventions. Who's going to use this more? Who's stuck maintaining it, right? You've got this analytical department, and you've got this other analytical department. One of them deals with market research. The other one deals with sales and client retention, right? And they're both building tables, building a lot of data marts because they've been given those roles and are building the stuff. So they both feel like they're entitled to it. But maybe IT should weigh in, since guess what? They're the ones that got to make sure that it's across the board and beyond those two departments is adhered to and complied with, right? So unfortunately, it's not a simple answer. And it's one that you're just going to have to get everybody in a room. We're not leaving here until we're done. And if we need to, we'll make it like Thunderdome. 2 may enter, 1 may leave, right? And that's just the way it goes until a decision is made. Okay? Modeling style guidelines. Snowflake, Star, single data mart, one giant data warehouse. Do we use a tabular model? Do we use multidimensional? Do we have one giant tabular model and cube? Do we have 15 of them? Do we do it subject matter based? Do we do it user access based? Do we use perspectives? Do we? If left to their own devices, every project will make their own decisions, which means as an organization whose job is to provide you the hardware to shoot yourself in the foot with, and then being told that they got to maintain and keep track of all this stuff, they probably want to make sure that things are conforming a particular way, so one process can rule them all. From a backup perspective, HA, DR, all this other stuff. But if some people are building their semantic layer in views inside of a database, another one's using a tabular model cube, another one's using a third-party product, and now you're expecting IT to manage this and back it up and maintain business continuity because that is what data governance says is their responsibility for this, they're not going to like you. And ultimately, this is why you need to come up with those modeling guidelines, right? You know, you always get, there's this question that came out back in 2012, 2014, 2016 of SQL Server. Do you go multidimensional or do you go tabular model? And my thing is, why do you need to pick? Use a progression model. You start with tabular. When you outgrow it, or if you have a need that doesn't exist, then you go multidimensional. In the meantime, stick it there. But who came up with that? What is that process? How do we know that that is the decision we should make? Those are the guidelines I'm talking about here, right? Data name conventions, right? Report design guidelines. Report in a dashboard. What are the differences? What's the difference between a report and a dashboard? Somebody. Yes, sir.
One is aggregated data, and the other one is maybe all the transactions.
Okay, one's aggregated, one's transactional. Another definition, another stab at what the difference is. Yes, sir. Okay, dashboard can have multiple reports of disparate data. Another definition? Yes, sir. Okay, so the amount of time expected on user interaction with it. Less than 10 seconds on a dashboard, a lot more time on a report. Someone over here.
I just want to say, just generic names would essentially be the same thing, whatever you call it. So a dashboard is a type of report, a report is seen as a dashboard. Fortunately, Microsoft in infinite wisdom has said that dashboard is something else in Power BI, so users are very confused.
So let me give you my thoughts on this, right? Dashboard is supposed to piss you off and make you happy. If you're not getting an emotional response from what you're looking at in the dashboard, you've got the wrong metrics. You don't care about what's there. When you're driving your car down the street and you see the check engine light come on for the first time, what do? Oh my God, what the heck's going on? Do I need to worry what's happening? You get the low oil light. Oh my God, am I going to blow my engine? Do I need to take care of this? But anything else that's there, if you don't see anything pop up, who cares, right? So a dashboard should elicit that. A report does not. Whatever tool you use to surface up that type of response from your users, that's irrelevant, right? You can build dashboards in Excel. You can build dashboards with Power BI reports, right? In desktop. You can use different tools. But at the end of the day, that is the goal of a dashboard. It's supposed to elicit a response. So how do you know which tool to use? Because we got SSRS, we got Excel, we got Power BI, we've got old school Data Zen because we haven't changed that yet for mobility reports, right? We've got all these different reporting tools to use. How do we know which one we're supposed to make this report in? What are the guidelines to make sure we use the right tool for the right thing? Okay. Was that? I'll tell you what, it does work, especially when you got a process around the idea of promotion, right? So it is one thing to sit here and say, hey guys, you should use Power BI when you want to do visuals. You probably want to use SSRS when you got a long list of stuff that you just want to provide, right? And that's a quick divide. How do you maintain that? How do you monitor that? How do you do that in a self-service world, right? You build a process around it. You say, you know what, you go build your own stuff. Here's the guidelines. By the way, before anything goes to production, someone in IT gets to evaluate before it gets promoted to a production environment. It's called separation of duties, right? A lot of us are dealing with that now. And maybe it's not IT, maybe it's a data steward who's responsible for that particular business unit. But at the end of the day, it's a responsibility of someone to go through, you know what, you just stuck an SSRS report inside a Power BI desktop file. That's not going to happen, right? It's the wrong tool for the wrong thing. And that's where it goes back to not only do you have to build process, but you got to build some kind of enforcement. And if the organization heads that are represented inside of this council are not in agreement of what this policy should be, and they use your data stewards, which some organizations are building what's called business relationship users or business relationship managers, right? Where their goal is to translate what this business unit is doing to IT and translate IT to business units, right? Those are high candidates for this data stewardship role because they have the ability to translate and the ability to be able to say, yes, you're in compliance, no, you're not. Okay? So that's kind of where the report design guidelines come into play. In some organizations, you got all kinds of stuff, right? You got Tableau, you got Cognos, you got all these other tools. And they're everywhere. Why? Because you're an organization, your business model as an organization is to consume smaller businesses. And what may happen is you may consume 13 in a year. So what are you going to do? Integrate 13, convert 13 people? Oh, heck no. You're just going to assimilate their AD, make sure their security model's there, and then hopefully, eventually start figuring out what they need. But a lot of times they're going to be like, I want to keep my tool because I bought it. This is my baby. Might be ugly, but it's mine, right? And that's where you get this piece where you need to figure out how this stuff's going to work. And this is why you need representation. And ultimately, you need someone to be a tiebreaker, and that's usually a CFO, CIO, or some kind. Metadata definitions, right? You need to figure out how you're going to track this metadata. What's a definition? How is this called? Where is this at? What is this data set representing, right? Things like a data catalog. I'm not talking about the Azure data catalog tool, but just in general, using the tool to manage a data catalog, a list of this is what we have and this is what we call things, right? When you say you need a data set, this is it. When you say you need a data mart, this is it. When you say you need a data model, this is it. When you say you need a cube, this is it. Right? So managing how things are called and all the metadata around it, right? When was it created? When was the last refresh? When was the last update? Who touched it? Where's the data definition documents for this cube and all this other stuff, right? All this information of these different reports, these different sets that we have, that ultimately we need to understand how it's being used. Audit it. Control where it goes if you can. Or at least hold people responsible and give them the training to recognize that, look, we're going to give you the chance, the opportunity to shoot yourself in the foot. And if you do, we're just going to cut your foot off because apparently you don't want it. You've been warned. And some organizations work on that premise, right? And there's a major infraction. Let's just say there's a PCI compliance issue or something like that, and they get dinged. And a lot of times it changes leadership in that stack because it was your responsibility to manage that. If that risk is too high, guess what? They're not in charge. Someone is appointed from an IT. IT becomes a bigger organization. And this goes back to what are your organizational goals, right? There's push for the last 5 to 8 years. Let the business run as fast as the business wants to run. Let the business units do that. Self-service, fantastic. Give me the tool, I'll do it. Every business unit is hiring their own analyst / developer / data scientist, right? To do and build their own things. Shadow IT, anybody? Right? And now we're asking them to kind of come back into the fold. But when that happens, right, you need to have the process in place to be able to give them the autonomy to run at their pace. But just like at a race in the track and field event, you've got lines. You're not allowed to cross in anybody else's lane. And yeah, you got to jump over the hurdle or else you get dinged, right? There are guidelines, but you can run as fast or slow as you want within those. And most shadow IT occurrences is because they're not aware of it. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm asking for something, and because I'm not saying it the right way, or I don't have the right audience, or I don't have a medium or a way to evangelize what I'm looking for, I'm being told no. I'm being told it's going to be months. I'm being told this by IT. And IT is looking at this from the perspective, look, you're asking for a 3-month project in 2 months, assuming we have nothing else to do. You're going to be on hold. And this goes back to how do you manage that transparency, right? How do you make sure that IT plays the role they need to be and backs away from the roles that they've chosen to adopt over the last 30 years and give it back to the business unit. And how does that balance work? That's an evolution. And that goes back to understanding what is the overall IT strategy of the organization. And then what role does data governance go to enforce that? And then what are the tools we're using, the processes we're putting in place to enforce yet that layer? And all of that working in concert is where that holy grail comes into play, right? It's no different than trying to go from a waterfall to an agile environment, right? I'm a fan of agile, but it retards my productivity when I'm working in agile. I cannot run as fast as I want. I can't just develop anything and everything I need and get it done in a week. Why? Because I got to help those beside me. I got to only work what's being asked. I don't have the full roadmap. But at the same time, if you got a team of 10 people, you got 2 sprinters and 2 marathon runners, and then 2 people that are just trying to figure out how to walk, right? They help each other out. That team eventually elevates over the course of 3 or 4 sprints. They learn to work together. They learn their strengths. They learn their weaknesses. They start addressing those weaknesses. And ultimately, productivity for this entire team will be faster and more productive than the 1 or 2 individuals that can sprint, because now everybody's at that same pace. And over time, they all continue to move faster. So yes, Agile slows things down. Agile will retard your superstars. But Agile's not built for superstars. Agile's built for a team sport. You can have a home run hitter, but if your pitching sucks, your team's going to lose. You can have the best quarterback you want. You don't have a line, that quarterback's going to be toast in a year. Okay? So it's a team sport, and that's what we're transforming here with projects. And a lot of times these projects are not aware of guidelines, or they don't exist. So they're making up their own things as they go, their own naming conventions, their own frameworks. They're reinventing the wheel at times. Okay? And this is where reusable assets and components come into play. Data governance goes beyond databases. It's your app dev team. Because guess what they're doing? They're building widgets and applications and mobile apps that are generating data that's landing it somewhere. And how many DBAs complain about, okay, you know what, I can't touch this database. Horribly built, it's built by a developer, right? Because they did code-first development instead of database-first development. And there's a debate on that, and I'm not going to get into that. But ultimately, there's these pockets of things that are out there that if we built frameworks, we built conventions, it allows these team members that are working in these agile teams, that because everybody uses the same convention, the same pieces of code to execute the same kind of thing, you're building an iteration this way. You're building your drop-down list. You're building your structures. You're building all your objects, your classes this way. It means someone else can come in behind you and get to work immediately and not have to decipher what the heck's going on. 6 months later, someone can go in and fix a bug or an unrealized scenario that just presented itself because of an update in another app. So these conveniences come into play, and as much as it slows things down, they're necessary to make sure you have this ability to have the CI/CD stuff that everyone wants, right? It's continuous integration, continuous deployments. You've got to have conventions to make that happen. DevOps, hot term, everyone wants it, right? And I'm not talking about Azure DevOps, just DevOps in general. Everyone wants to implement a DevOps engagement. I'm doing a lot of that today with some of my clients. And at the end of the day, you need to have a maturity model to be able to get there. And these guidelines, this governance concept, this IT strategy concept helps with those things. Yes, sir?
Yes, quick question. My limited experience, a framework like that, usually they host it on Jira or some Wikipedia. It's a living document of design patterns, conventions. Would you say in your experience, is that something that you have to have finished before you start the project, or is it a build as you go type?
I'd like to answer that question with the idea with how do you implement a data governance program in general, right? Because I think the answer is the same, okay? If you got an organization that does not have a data governance program, or it's fractured, right? You've got this piece, but not this. How do you get those pieces? How do you do it in a global organization where you got 30 plants, 100 sites? How do you do that? one project at a time. If you do not have a data governance program, you sit down and you come to the conclusion, we need one. And then you'll be like, all right, we need one, and we're going to take this project, and we're going to build a data governance program for this project. What are the conventions? What are the frameworks? What are the data classifications? What do we need to do? All this stuff. And you would use this project as your test bed to see how well your governance program works. Because at the end of the day, the governance program is not supposed to retard a project to the point that it can't move. But yet it needs to put enough guidelines and guidance to where they can move within the confines that are controlled and available and visible to the organization. Once that project completes, you have a retrospective. What worked, what didn't? How did it work? Guess what? This was cool. I like this. I think this has value. This right here really sucked. This did not work. This really slowed me down. I disagree with this. All right, fine. Guess what? Next project. Let's augment this a little bit. Let's try it. Next project, try it. Next project, try it. And ultimately what happens is now you have these projects that hopefully are following a guideline that will evolve slightly, but yet are close enough that if you needed to go back and retrofit, you can do it, and you've got this test bed to be able to test it. And essentially, this becomes a living document, a living process. Because today, the way we code today with the tools we have today and the frameworks and the design patterns that we have work for today. A new tool comes out 3 months from now, 3 years from now, augmented reality, we need to build that. It's a whole different framework. We don't have that in-house. You can't apply standard design architecture to that. And that's where the evolution comes in. So I think to your answer is these conventions, you try and come up with something as close to the beginning as possible, but they will evolve. And what I would do is I would look out there and see, you're not the first person to do this. You want database naming conventions? You want database conventions in general? There are documents out there you can download. We're going to start with this. Let's review this. What makes sense, what doesn't? All this makes sense because we're lazy. We don't want to actually review it. Fine. This is what we're following. At the end of our project or the end of our sprint or the end of whatever it is, how did it work? Does that answer your question? Or at least provide some insights? Yes, sir.
So do you encourage starting with a source system first or just have an enterprise-wide scale?
You always start everything small. You always take a bite of the big elephant. You don't try and put it all in your mouth, you'll choke. And what happens is that organizations get overwhelmed. Business units feel underrepresented. They don't understand what's going on. And they say, I don't want this. And there's a revolt. And at the end of the day, if the CEO has enough of his underling chiefs complaining about how this is not working, regardless of how good of an idea it is and how much it needs to happen, it will die. Yes?
So then 2 years later, would you advise having source system governance teams that then relate to a larger enterprise? Or
Those are the stewards, right? And that's where the delegation of responsibility comes in, right? Everyone has this concept of data stewards. They're just data entry people. All they do is put stuff into Excel or master data, and that's it. Data stewards goes beyond that, because now they can be process stewards. They can be governance stewards, right? And the idea is that when you start small and you come up with something that you think works and you've established it to 3 or 4 projects, now let's go retrofit some of our older stuff. Let's go back and take this project that was completed 2 years ago. Let's go into our SAP system. Let's go into our Salesforce. Let's go into our other systems that we have, and let's figure out, start classifying our data. At a minimum, what is the risk of this data if it goes out? And you're not going to classify SAP as risky. No, every piece of that. Maybe start with the module. We got this client management module, got this HR module, got this finance module, got this timesheet module, got this module. Let's start somewhere. And let's see how well what we have proven on new project work, how it works there. And chip away at it. This thing that we're going to take 2 years and do and get this done in 2 years? No, because guess what's going to happen in 2 years? You're going to get 5 new systems. You're going to retire systems. You're going to augment systems. Systems will evolve through upgrades. They're going to add new modules because business units will be able to purchase their own modules. You think HR is going to go to IT or is going to go to marketing to see if they can do this? More than likely, no, because they have the autonomy, right? To do this, they report to the CFO. CFO's the purse strings. I'm going to approve this purchase. And because it's just a bolt-on module to an existing IT thing, guess what? They're not going to go through IT. And this goes back to making sure that there's buy-in from the organization. This thing's, right? People go rogue because they don't know it exists. I didn't know there was a data governance. I didn't know there was a naming convention. There was a project I was in there for a month and a half. Did some work. Went to their enterprise architect review. First time meeting them. Got destroyed in the architecture review. And they're like, didn't you follow our naming guidelines and so forth? No one provided it. I asked, no, it wasn't provided. What the heck's going on? Now I'm hearing about it. Awesome, cool. So our deliverable gets pushed by 2 weeks because we get to refactor things because things weren't discussed, weren't made available. They weren't evangelized. Hey, I know this data governance, but because I'm an app dev, I don't need to do data governance. They don't know they should work within those confines. They don't understand what role they play within the organization and what role within the data, whether it's generating data, managing data, reading data, using data. They feel that because I'm just a coder, I do not need to comply. And this goes back to what is this concept of governance? Okay? It's too difficult to work with. You know what? To get anything done, I got to jump to 1,000 hoops. This just sucks. I can't do this. Right? Which means your data governance project, the process that you have in place, has to protect the business, but at the same time, it cannot be this roadblock that's insurmountable. It's got to be the happy medium. You got to figure out how that goes, and that's where that evolution comes in. Right? Some people say you start really strict and you loosen up. Others are like, give them everything and we pare down. You need to start in the middle and then figure out which way you need to go. Because if you lock everything down, no one's going to want to use it. If you open everything up, you just got fines up the wazoo. So you need to find the happy medium, somewhere to start. And everyone's going to be like, oh, I prefer this, I prefer that. But you know what? We need to start somewhere. So I'm just going to drop this ball right here, and we will navigate it as we learn more about our process. Because you're going to get detractors. They're going to be like, we don't know enough. We need more time. We can't make this decision. This decision is too big for one person or for one small organization to make. Well, you know what? Someone has to make it. Someone has to start it. It has to begin somewhere and let it evolve. It's when the decision is made and there's this impression that it's never going to change again. It's not a stone tablet. We're talking about a rocket book. You write something with a friction pen, you erase it and write it again. That's what this needs to be. It needs to be living. And it's not something that's built in a day, right? Not only too difficult to work with, but too slow, right? I need to follow this process, and this process means my project's now held up by a month just to get access to a database, or just to get clearance to be able to hit the data lake, or to be able to deploy something in Azure, or to go to code review because there's a long list of other people that have pushed their code to this one team whose job is to do it. Kind of like the Apple Store, right? You build an app, you put it up there, you wait for months before they come back, you hope everything works. All those efforts to be told, yeah, you need to rename your stuff because you didn't follow conventions. Crap. Makes you not want to do it again sometimes. Same thing here, okay? Things are too slow. You're going to find yourself in a position where you're just not going to want it. Or offers little value. You give me this guidance for what? Doesn't matter to me. I don't agree with it. I don't have to follow it. There's no enforcement. I don't understand why I can't make my own decisions. And here's the beautiful part, right? You get all these teams. I want to make my own decisions. We want the autonomy to be able to do our own thing. Great. Are you going to accept the responsibility too? Are you going to accept the responsibility to secure it, to comply? And when an infraction comes out, is it going to come out of your pocketbook? Are you going to run the risk of everybody in this organization just shutting this plant down or shutting this site down because you chose to make a decision? Do you want that on your shoulders? Do you really want to take that decision? A lot of times they'll be like, whoa, it's not what I was asking for. Well, that's what we're trying to do with these guidelines. We're trying to make sure that we absolve you of responsibility to a certain level. That if you comply with these, you do it this way, we as the council will take responsibility if anything happens because you follow the guidelines. That means something else broke or there was a hole in the process. But it's not because you failed, because you did what you're supposed to do. So when you get pushback about what value do I get, throw that scenario out there. You'd be surprised how many people say, well, I don't want to take that responsibility. I mean, let's put it this way. How many times we go home and say, hey, what do you want for dinner? I don't know. You make the decision. We all know what we want. When we ask that question, I know what I want. I want my pizza. I want my burger. I want this. But I want to see if you align with me so I don't have to fight you for it. So I will ask. And when you ask that question, the other individual's like, yeah, I know I want some pasta and salad, but you know what? I know they're not going to want it, so I'm just going to say, I don't care. And no one gets or speaking their mind, right? All this is doing is saying, hey, guess what? We know what we're getting into when we have these conversations. We know what we're getting into when you're dealing with this. So ways to successful implementation. It's got to make it easy to adopt and provide value to developers, right? If you're going to do a governance program, you got to have frameworks already built for them. Here's some design patterns. Here's some code. Here's some education. Here's some stuff that will help you. DBAs, here's DDL. Here's some stored procs, which already have code snippets. You don't have to build the loops. You don't have to build these pieces. You don't have to build the JSON ripper or XML ripper. Here's some code already there. Find and replace the values that you need and build it. Come up with these conventions. It'll make them easier to work with. And again, if it takes away some of the decision-making on their part, they don't have to sit here and wonder, should I call it this, should I call it that? Should I do a SP underscore my stored proc? Should it be USP? Or should I just give it the name of the project? Should I? Those decisions are out the door. They know exactly what they're supposed to do. So as much as some of these things might seem like they're slowing things down, you're going to speed things up because I don't have to spend the time thinking, what the hell am I going to do? And then going back and refactoring it later. Adapt the process to changing needs. I can't stress this enough. There's a lot of organizations that say, hey, you know what, this is what it is, it's there. Look, the tablets were broken for different reasons. But they're broken because there's more than that what fits here. And we need to make sure we're able to evolve our process. We can't just write it in stone and walk away because that's not how it works. Technology changes. The landscape of dealing and interacting with humans change, which requires our process, our work, our frameworks to change. The technologies we use will sometimes dictate what are some of the new things we need to adapt and adopt into this process, okay? We're talking about this continuous automation piece, right? This concept of, continuous integration, continuous development through some kind of DevOps process. That takes away a lot of things that used to be in this governance piece, right? How do you conduct a UAT? What must it pass? How do you do this? You must do this, must do that. Now it's more like, you just push here, click a button. If it says green light, you're good. Red light, you're bad. Fix what it tells you. Technologies will cause you to change and evolve. And you got to make sure your processes are audited. Because if your processes are outdated, it goes back to what value does it bring. It goes back to, is it too hard to work with? Is it too slow? Because technology has made it faster. But because our process has not allowed the technology to play a role in it, it now starts conflicting with it. Build compliance into your process. This thing of, hey, build a project and then go through compliance, no. Part of the very first thing that happens when you're architecting a solution, coming up with a product that deals with data, generating data, you need to classify your information. What kind of data is this going to deal with? Do I have compliance issues? Do I need to deal with security? Is this part of a bigger data initiative? Is this part of an MDM? Should I be pulling my data from an MDM system versus generating my own or pulling it from a transactional system? All of these things should be included in the conversation about what this project should entail. And determine, here's the processes we need to follow. Here's the naming conventions we need to use. Then you can start this project. But when you try and do it midstream, midway, this goes back to bait and switch, right? Hey, I'm happy coding. All of a sudden, I got to go from .NET to Java? Crap, it's not what I wanted to do. I'm going to quit. And that's from a personal standpoint, right? But imagine a whole team being told that you're doing something one way. No. You can't build your own database. It's got to fit here. Oh, and by the way, it's got to be a conformed model to this data warehouse. You can't just build your own schema. Oh, crap. And yes, you must adhere to type 2, even though you don't need it in your data set. Crap. That's more work. Something that was not scoped out. Something that we don't have the internal team skill set. Didn't realize. So build compliance into it. Flexible architectures and frameworks. And I know this is an irony in its way, right? You got a framework supposed to provide you guidelines, but now we're talking about making it flexible. The flexibility in this case is about being able to audit and augment and evolve this framework. You're not going to use a .NET coding framework in SSIS unless you're building a script object or script task, right? You're not going to use mobile development ideology for UI UX in SSRS or paginated reports. That's not what it's built for. So understanding how things are used and understanding what frameworks go where, and understanding that as technologies change, your frameworks are going to have to change, right? The way you built mobile apps 5, 10 years ago is not the way you build it now. Back then, you had to pick a language and work with it because you're developing for Android versus Windows versus iOS. This is 5, 7, 8 years ago, right? Then Xamarin comes around. One code rules them all. Awesome, great, don't need to do that anymore. Again, evolve. Understand the technologies that are being put in place. Let your development teams, allow them, encourage them to challenge the process, because it will bring insights into how your process may need to change. Plus, it gives them a voice that they feel they've never had. Because if all I'm doing is following in compliance, that is no different than someone who's conscripted into a war they didn't want to be in. Here's a gun you're going to have to shoot, or you're going to get shot at. Versus, you know what? I really don't want to join. I like doing tanks instead. I'd rather drop the big bombs instead. Can I do that? Right? So now you're giving the developers the opportunity to shape this process. And because they have this sense of participation, there's a sense of ownership. And when there's a sense of ownership, it's not going to be hard to get them to want to comply to a process they help build. They help shape. This is my baby. See that right there? Yeah, I brought that up. How many of us have submitted bugs to Microsoft and seen an SP1 or SP2 fix or a hot fix come out and be like, yeah, that's my baby. I found that. You're all welcome because I found that, right? That's the kind of thing you will get when people feel like they're involved, okay? Ensure data governance is aligned with your IT governance and IT strategies, okay? If there's a disconnect, that's an issue. Evangelize the process and the value it provides, okay? It's hard to follow something you didn't know existed. It's hard to follow it accurately when you don't know where to go to find the rules of engagement. How many times have we found ourselves playing a game? All right, let's throw this down. Let's go play pool, billiards. You're playing at my house. You can come into my house, you're going to instill your rules in my house. It's called house rules, baby. This is the way it works. This is how we play in my place. You go to a bar, there are bar rules. You go to someone else's house, it's their house. I scratch. What does that mean? Behind the 2 dots, what you broke from, or anywhere on the table? You're calling your shots. What do you call? Do you call rails? How far do you call the rails? Those are house rules. But if I don't know they exist, how can I follow it? Same thing here. You've got consultants as part of your projects. The first thing you need to bring them on is, hey, there are guidance. There are guidelines. Here's how this works. Here's what you need to follow. Here they are. I welcome you to challenge these things. It's amazing the perspective you can get when you bring in outside help, because they don't have the baggage of being there 10 years, knowing the evolution, and thinking only the way that it has evolved. It can bring perspective that is very different and may bring some enlightenment that'll be like, you know what, we could make this better or make it more resilient. All right, so how much time do I have left? Anybody? 10 minutes. Excellent, excellent. So all these different areas right here, these are the different technology areas that when you're talking about data governance, they play a role. And when you're trying to figure out what role it plays, you're talking about data development, data architecture management, data quality management, master data management, document and content management, data warehousing, BI management, reference and master data management, security management, database operations management. The word management is all over that. okay? But there's a lot there. And there's not one tool to rule them all. There's not one organization that rules them all. But there should be one council that helps direct what needs to be in the tool that's selected to make sure it follows the process. And when you're going through this, everything that you select to address any of these aspects, you need to go back to the framework. You need to go back and ask yourself, how are we going to manage the quality? How are we going to manage the integrity, the availability, security, usability, auditability? How's this going to work? And maybe it's a quick fix. It doesn't exist. Don't need to worry about that. Not a problem. But at least you ask the question. It's amazing how many organizations will pick a tool because, oh, I like it. It's great. It's flashy. I got sold on it. And realize it does not meet any of your needs. Or this idea of one tool to rule them all. You know what? You may want to reconsider that based on certain conditions and constraints that you have. There's an interesting fact that C-level people change every 5 years. That's the average. And what usually happens when you get a change in C-level leadership? And C-level is your chief executive officer, chief data officer, chief location officer, chief fill-in-the-blank officer. So many chiefs nowadays, people are making chiefs, chief bird selection officer, right? All kinds of stuff. So now the question is, when one of those leave, what usually happens? Anybody? Process change. Change. It usually changes in two ways. Their friends come in, and their tools come in. And guess what usually happens? We just spent 3 years implementing Power BI. Now we got to do this in Click. Damn, this sucks. We just did all this time in Tableau, and now we got to do it here. We just did all this time in this vendor's product line, and now we got to convert it to this because this person doesn't like them. You just spent millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of man-hours doing something, and now you have to convert. And this is where understanding that through governance, you can manage the modularity of your tool set, of what you're doing. This one tool to rule them all concept is very attractive because I only go to one person to complain about any part of it. But when there's a technology shift, a shift in how things are done, you're now bound until this tool decides to make those changes for themselves and adapt and follow suit. And if you want it sooner, you're going to have to replace this whole tool because you want this augmented reality piece that these guys don't do. And because this augmented reality piece cannot read the data set, is not part of the security model, is not part of what this is doing, you got a decision to make. Either you get this and you conform all of this to that, which means you got to build it outside or recreate it or replace it, or you forego that. But if you ask these questions with every tool that you make, how does it fit in the governance side of things? And you stick to the idea as close as possible to modularity, you'll find yourself that your organization will be much more agile, right? Instead of sticking the semantic layer inside of a self-service tool, which is inevitable and will happen and does happen, is guaranteed to continue to happen, before that gets published to the general public to use in the organization, there could be a separation of duties at that point. I love this Power BI desktop you just made. It's great. This model's fantastic. But guess what? We're going to make it a data flow object. You know what? We're going to take this data set and make it a data set report. And then we're going to take your visual and have your visual point to this data set. Or we're going to take this data set and make it a tabular model instead. Because I want to make sure that Excel gives the same numbers too, not just Power BI. I want to make sure that other Power BI reports can use this data set for other organizations, not just you. So the architecture that you follow, the paradigms that you go with, they all need to follow this governance, this IT strategy. And it kind of rolls all together where you need to make the decision of what level of involvement your staff has in this. And for anybody to follow it, isn't it great when you are the one that are participating in the decision making, or at least in the influencing of that decision, versus you just being voluntold, you're going to do this. We usually don't have smiles when we get voluntold. We usually be like, got to do this as well. I've already got 50 hours worth of work. I want to tell them no, but I got a kid in the way. I can't do that, right? But if I'm part of the process, you know what? I'll do my extra 17 hours on top of the 50. Why? Because I know where it's going towards. I buy it into it. I'm invested in that process, in that idea. So this is no different. So when you're addressing these different areas, you're doing tool selection. Figure out how this framework fits into that. Ask these questions. They may or may not be relevant, but ask them anyways. If nothing else, to say it's not relevant. Versus, I didn't realize that. I didn't know. And then you find yourself in a situation where, hey, guess what? You get to try to rip things apart. And guess what? I'm advocating for you not to do that, because that's part of the business I'm in as a consultant. I go in and help you tear stuff apart that you pigeonholed yourself in. Yes, sir. So the first thing, so the question was, for those that didn't hear, or how do you get fragmented organizational units or data governance units, right? You got governance handled by 3 or 4 different areas that are technologically advanced. They're the developers of the group. They're the business units that are generating the most data or whatever. And they come up with their own. How do you unify that? How do you start getting that process to work? It starts with the top. Okay? When you got everybody as equal playing field, everyone wants to lead. My team is better. My way is better. You tell me, is the rice I'm cooking or the rice you're cooking better? The rice your mom cooked versus the restaurant across the street. You tell me what's better. It's always going to be better when you have something vested, which means it's going to be hard to talk you out of that. And the only way to talk you out of that is have someone upstairs to say, hey, you know what? You're going to do this. Right? It's no different than having a pair of kids. One's got the pen, the other one's got the cap. All right? Now use this analogy to talk about deadlocks. Right? SQL Server. You got 2 processes trying to fight for something. You got one kid has the pen, the other one's got the cap. Someone says, put the pen in the cap. I don't want to give it up. I don't want to give it up. You give it up. You give it to me. Boom, smackdown. Someone gets smacked, it gets over. Done deal. Now it's done, right? Standard deadlock approach for SQL Server. No difference here. Okay? You've got difference of opinions. You've got different personalities. They're fantastic at their jobs, so you do not want to alienate them. But at the same time, a decision has to be made because you can't continue fragmented. So someone up top has to have the strength and the leadership to be able to provide that guidance and say, you will do this. And you can either figure out how to work together, or I will tell you how you're going to work together. But you've got a week to work together, right? And let it work, right? Let the process work. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, just an additional part to it was, do you advocate for people performing at least the important roles in data governance as full-time or part of some?
So the other part is, do data stewards, the people that are advocating and managing and monitoring the process, should that be a full-time job or not? That it depends, right? I think the people that should be these data stewards, these advocates, should be subject matter experts. They should be the ones that know the data best. They know what's valuable. They know what's at risk. They know the people. They know the process. They know the business units. And it could be this business unit relationship people that I talked about. It could be an individual that happens to be the leader of a team, and they want that responsibility. Because that's the other piece. You can't just assign it to someone. Because what will happen, it'll become just like any other job. I'll do just enough to skirt by. You need someone who's going to evangelize and be motivated to want to be a part of that process. to push it, to maintain it, and secure it for you, right? So that right there is your ideal person. Whether that's a full-time job or not, I've seen it both ways. I've seen an organization, hey, we got an entire data governance department. I chuckle because they're all just dealing with master data management, nothing else. And this goes back to, what is that definition of data governance, right? How deep do you want to go with this definition? Do you want to stick with just a very simple, hey, I got data, I manage it, it's now governed? Or do you want to include everything else that helps generate this data? Use this data, consume, secure, audit, make available. Answer your question? Cool. Anybody else? All right, please go online, please evaluate. I'm a big fan of being blunt, being direct. If I sucked, say so. But just don't tell me I suck, tell me why. You need to say suck less. You use crap too much. You kept on squeaking the floor. It annoyed me. Whatever it happens to be, I'm open to all suggestions. Some things I can fix, something I may choose not to fix. But I welcome it. So please, do evaluate. And thank you.